When the economic environment becomes uncertain, we provide the truth from a breadth of perspectives to help people make decisions. We not only compile and analyze the data that moves our ever-evolving economy, we carefully craft our own to provide clarity across industries, businesses, and employment markets. We identify unique opportunities to deliver asymmetric returns and focus on capturing value created during periods of higher volatility, transforming the financial landscape together. We're MacroEdge.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MacroEdge Radio, broadcasting coast to coast, sea to shining sea, and continent to continent, live from the MacroEdge studios in sunny South Florida. We've got a very special guest here to discuss the state of the economy and the latest trends in the U.S. Here with me today to co-host is my colleague, fellow RE Sites analyst, and my friend MelodyWright. Melody, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Can you hear me, Melody?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? Okay.
All right. We also have here a very special guest that has agreed to join us on MacroEdge Radio, somebody that needs no introduction, but we'd be remiss without doing so anyways. She's the founder and CEO of QI Research, former Federal Reserve insider, author of the book Fed Up, and the one and only Danielle DiMartino Booth. Danielle, welcome to MacroEdge Radio. Thanks for joining us.
Well, I'm great. I'm actually delayed here at Newark Airport, so I thought I was going to have to jump off after 45 minutes, but here I sit.
Hey guys, I'm kind of worried that Mr. Awsumb, Ulysses, can't hear us. Ulysses, can you hear us?
Oh, I got you now.
Okay.
Can you hear? Okay. Can you hear me? Hopefully.
I can indeed. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry for the glitch there in Spaces.
Oh,
welcome to you both.
I thought you were calling up Newark security, Newark Airport security, and putting a complaint for me that my flight's delayed.
No, not at all. Not at all. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much.
It's great to be here. I wish I was here under better circumstances. I actually flew up this morning for Arthur Cashin's funeral, and I have to say there was a silver lining, and that is that his 6th grade teacher, this little itty bitty waif of a nun, was in attendance in the sanctuary. So it kind of renewed my spirits.
That's wonderful. It's good to have the silver linings, especially with tragedy like that. Thank you for sharing that. I've got a question for you. Being that you're a University of Texas alum, back in 2009, a fellow Texas alum and the greatest college quarterback of all time, found himself looking for a job and found that it was very difficult to get a starting job in the NFL, Colt McCoy. But there were tons of college grads back then that were having the same issue. And with the employment report today, we've seen college grads having the same issues. What do you make of that in the employment market right now?
So, it was really interesting. The bulk of the gangs that we saw today were 16 to 19-year-olds, presumably picking up a holiday gig. And we saw a very disturbing decline in prime age, in the prime age labor force participation rate, also in those 55 and older. And of course, those who are 55 and older in the current environment are they're in the workforce because they're trying to help their kids who can't get jobs or who've lost their jobs supplement their income. Of course, we've seen, just an explosion in multi-generational household formation. So today's jobs report was just disturbing on so many levels. My oldest kid is 20 years old. He's a junior at the University of Texas. Hook 'em. And I'm listening to his friends who are seniors. I'm watching them take a 5th year of college if they can, because the job market is just abysmal. And when you think about all of the things that are in flux right now, human beings are being offshored, whether you're a paralegal or an accountant or anybody who you would consider to be in the professional world, an architect. The work from anywhere, blase, millennial, Gen Z attitude eventually lit a fire underneath offshoring white collar jobs. And then you have this trend collide with artificial intelligence. And all of a sudden, you've got a generation of Americans who all piled into computer science. They said, I don't want to go to work at Goldman Sachs. I want to go to work at the other G, Google. And now we're seeing, basically blood in the streets in Silicon Valley and on Wall Street. So it is a very precarious hiring environment right now. I would say the worst in at least several generations for new college undergraduates, many of whom have discovered in the period of 4 short years, gee, I studied the wrong thing.
Yeah, trends can change really quickly, can't they?
Yes, they can. I mean, remember we were telling kids not to go to medical school? Boy, those doctors are making bank right now.
Absolutely. Now, the other thing that came out today with the unemployment is the actual employment level is negative, correct? Year over year?
Yes, it is. In fact, if you look at the 15-month change, I'm kind of giving a sneak preview to my institutional Saturday Outlook. They just love it when I do that, like on a public forum. But anyways, if you look at the 15-month change in private non-farm payrolls, we've never been where we are today outside of a serious recession. But I think that I almost, not that I want to drive because, I'm obnoxious and Italian and that's what I normally do. But I think we almost need to back up to the quarterly census of employment and wages that came out yesterday that rewrote history. And we now know that recession, for all the, Melody can attest if she unmutes herself that I don't know. She and I are in a foot race to see who can be more trolled. But for all of the trolling I've been on the receiving end of, it looks a lot like private sector payrolls turned negative in April, if not sooner.
Yeah, not a good sign for the economy. If payrolls are going negative, the actual employment level is going negative. And I think one of the things that I've taken away from this year's payroll reports and looking at past is, and you've mentioned this a few times, but backdating, right? There have been multiple instances of the US being in recession, and it's not reported as we're in recession, it gets backdated. And we have people, even from the Federal Reserve, that have issued papers back in 2001. Mary Daly was talking about we might be in a recession, and it turned out we were. So backdating is a real possibility of recession. Is that correct?
It is. In fact, it's not often that I would agree with Mary Daly, and I'm not going to miss her when she rotates off voting come December the 18th. Thank heavens for 3 years. But to President Daly's point, in 2001, for that first quarter, of course, that was the first full quarter in recession. We didn't know that there was a negative in front of that GDP print for 5 quarters. Zero coincidence that identical situation in Q1 of 2008. We did not know for 5 quarters that GDP report was actually a contraction. And so there is a massive lag. The Bureau of Economic Analysis just revised down third quarter of 2024 personal income by $91 billion, leaving in its wake $65 billion. I'll repeat that. The revision to personal income in 2024's third quarter was larger at 91 billion than the remainder at 65 billion. And that's what they know, just because the baton handoff from the second quarter to the third quarter was as bad as it was based on the quarterly census of employment and wages. So it's not just payrolls. It's not just the industrial production that we know, the industrial recession that we know that we've been in. It's not just the fact that when you take, and boy, this will float your boat. Watch out, you boys, buckle up, Melody. When we got the QCEW yesterday, we got for the first time the sector breakout. And guess what sector's been in contraction now that we have the revision, ... It's construction, boys and girls.
Yes.
Melody saw that in this morning's Feather.
Yes. Yeah, and I think, Danielle, we want to talk about that, talk about construction specifically, because, there are just there are a lot of analysts out there that really look at that construction employment as the signal. And, something I was kind of talking about with Kenny Cap PhD earlier today, one of the things that might be making that signal problematic is, of course, all of the cheap labor that's come over the border. But I definitely want to, get your thoughts on that construction employment to share with the group.
I'm going to throw cold water on the whole immigration story, simply because my eyes are open. And it's not that we haven't, look, I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and I live in Dallas. Not that I'm there much, but the unemployment rate among illegals right now is it's multitudes of what it is for the broader U.S. workforce. And I've gone from my little neighborhood chit chat, having one or two, gee, I've got a great plumber recommendation, gee, I've got a great remodeler, roofer, electrician, handyman. I've gone from having one a month to getting one a day. So, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that something has turned in construction. And on top of this, we have somebody who's arguably on the spectrum who's going to be in charge of cutting waste. And you can't tell me that all the padding that has benefited the U.S. economy because of the infrastructure and the CHIPS Act is not at risk of vanishing overnight.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. And I think, one of the things is thinking, kind of what Kenny Cap and I were talking about is just the fact that so many people have been confused about what's happening because they only look at that construction employment number. And, what we were thinking, or, just kind of talking about, was that, in reality, when you can pay someone so little, you can afford to have them on the payroll for a lot longer. But, again, we don't, I guess it's hard to say what if these numbers are even accurate that we're seeing from that perspective, because as Mr. Awsumb knows, he works deep in the construction industry, that a lot of times you really actually don't even know how many people might be working on a job because you're subcontracted.
Oh, look, just Melody, you track this closer than anybody else. If you add up the number of existing homes on the market to the number of new homes on the market, we're already past 2019 levels in the aggregate. The houses that are under construction have not all been completed, even though we've got spec houses that are for sale at the highest level since 09, 10. But on top of that, we have not seen the Airbnb jock dam break.
No.
It's just now that we're seeing rejection rates press up to 30% for mortgages and for refinancings. Mm-hmm. So this has been the caboose. We've had auto loan turned off basically, except for pristine credits, for more than 2 years now. Right. Credit cards have followed.
Right.
But the clampdown on mortgage lending standards is just now pulling into the station. So we have yet to see what's going to happen with these Airbnb jocks.
Yeah.
And with the mortgage contraction or the rejection rates being up, that's a sign of inability to get more credit and typical of a cyclical end, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But it's even more problematic, than if you're Joe and Jane Q and you've gone, whoopsie, I'm going to have a third kid. We no longer fit in this house. We need to, jump to a move up. That's one thing. You can always squeeze a pack and play in somewhere and stay where you are. But if you're running a Ponzi scheme where your mortgage was predicated on weekly income, Katie, bar the door.
Right.
That's when things began to snowball, when every smooth brain thought I was a genius, learned how to be a real estate multimillionaire on TikTok, realizes that Ponzi schemes sometimes give way.
That's really kind of an incredible thing this time around, is the amount of what used to be, you drive around neighborhoods and you saw the learn real estate investing signs on street corners prior to GFC. But now you're right. It's on TikTok, it's on YouTube. We've got the Burr method, and we've got people talking about it left and right, or had them talking about it left and right, leading up to in 2022 when rates started changing, the level of communication for that to spread, wouldn't you say, is much faster than it was in the prior real estate generated cycle?
Yeah. It's just like the way Silicon Valley Bank, the run occurred quicker than you think it would have, simply because of the power of social media. But I'm here to give you the ultimate reassurance. From everything that I've seen on my Twitter feed these last 2 some odd weeks or so, all of these geniuses have dumped or are in the process of dumping their real estate in order to lock into a more secure medium of exchange and store of value. So we can all sleep at night tonight.
And it's so true, and Danielle, this is what got arrested essentially kind of late 2022. We were seeing crypto and real estate, everybody was getting excited about that, and it would have gone full force had we not seen kind of rates started to rise, and then of course the banking crisis. But I think what happened with the banking crisis, the BTFP, the confidence game began in earnest again, and so here we are with Grant Cardone out there around Bitcoin and real estate, and it's absolutely insanity. But I agree with you, and what Mr. Awesumb was referring to, the Burr method, the buy, refinance, rehab, resell. This is what is really getting stopped in its tracks right now. And a lot of what's been happening, and this is, a lot of you on this call or space know this, that I think that honestly, part of our inventory shortage is not necessarily that it's been a shortage of homes listed, it's a shortage of homes listed on the MLS sites. And that social media has taken a front seat in kind of selling these homes and and I would say it's more like trading these cards, these high value spec homes that many of these Airbnb jocks have purchased so that they can get refinancing. And 100% that rejection rate, this is stopping that dead in its tracks. And that is why I think you're seeing this, at least so far, this kind of philosophical pivot on FinTwit toward, like you say, kind of coyly, Danielle, a safe asset.
I didn't use the word, Melody. Don't you dare. I'm not using any.
Yep.
I got to control. But look, I think that I don't think we necessarily appreciate the full context of 2 things. Canada is in a balance sheet recession, okay? And at threat of being in the crosshairs of a massive trade war. Balance sheet recessions take a very long time to play out. I think what we've seen in Toronto is a precursor to what we're going to see in the United States, because even at the rejection rates that we are discussing right now, because Moody's had the stones to put out a report that said, hey, regulators, we're not going to ignore anymore the downgrades that we need to press forward with in 2025 on the commercial real estate side, because now we're seeing double defaults. I think what people don't appreciate is that it's just one balance sheet at these banks. So if their commercial real estate, their auto loan, their credit card loan book are impaired, then what you're doing is you're tightening lending standards for even credit-worthy borrowers on a go-forward basis into 2025. And that's kind of the nuts and bolts and practicality of it, as we see France melting off the planet, Germany melting off the planet, both of which are reflections in some way, shape, or form of China being in as deep of a recession as we'll ever see, at least in print. And we operate under the auspice in the United States that we're somehow immune? I think not. So these are all very, very related matters. And you have a very left-leaning, corrupted, bureaucratic state that is being attacked, or knows it's going to be attacked by Elon and Vivek riding in with their machetes. You can't tell me they're not going to release the Kraken and just open the gates of hell and let all this data fly when they're under mortal threat.
Yeah, and Danielle, that that brings us to commercial real estate, which from the MacroEdge team we had quite a few questions, and I do think that finally after the extend and pretend and stay alive till 25, we're actually about to see this thing start to unfold. What do you think? This is one of the questions that we got. That commercial real estate overhang. What impacts do you think it could have to employment and inflation? Is the question we got.
So when it comes to inflation, see, in the same way that I like to follow same store sales, because the official retail sales data confuses the hell out of me. But that's because so much of it is healthcare and financial services. And so I look at same store sales. I want to know what's going on the ground. Okay. The analyst at Morgan Stanley a few weeks ago said to Walmart, you're one of the 5 retailers out of my universe of 35 that has positive same store sales. I draw a parallel to a separate Morgan Stanley set of data that's produced by CoStar, and that is measuring actual rents on A and B apartments. So when you look at those, you know that you're south of the 2015-19 average. So based on what we have.
Had a technical glitch there. Apologies. We're going to let Melody and Danielle get looped back in here. Melody, you back up?
I'm back. I'm just a speaker, but I'm back.
Wonderful. Glad to have you back. Apologies for the spaces glitch. That does happen from time to time. On that commercial real estate note that you were discussing, our friends over at CredIQ noted today that overall distress rate is up to 10%. And that's not a good sign either. Wouldn't you agree?
Good. That's no good.
Yeah, that definitely affects the commercial real estate market.
Absolutely. And I think what's most interesting, and I can't wait because she was really in the middle. To me, it's just kind of, we see all of these, going to special servicing. We see all of this distress, but the one place that I feel like we haven't seen a lot of it are in earnings and results. And so it's kind of like you're just waiting for that, waiting to see it really impact. And that's one thing I'm curious in talking to Danielle about, is when we think that impact might happen. And we have Randy on as well. I don't know if he wants to give a crack or an answer to that, or if he wanted to speak, or he's just in listen only mode. But that's really where I'm very curious as to the timing of how all of this unfolds.
Likewise, I think one of the things that she had brought up, being same store sales, that I'm looking at saying, how is it going to impact real estate and employment? Same store sales for restaurants and earnings have been atrocious for quite some time. And as we know, that's retail space. That's going to maybe lead to further weakness, especially as we've been watching giant restaurant bankruptcies. We've been watching closures left and right. Wouldn't you concur that that's another subsector of the employment that's at some point is going to have to show up in the numbers?
Absolutely. And just FYI, Ulysses, she thinks she's still on and can't hear. So I just texted her that to leave and come back.
Oh, perfect.
But I absolutely think it's going to impact employment, as well as, you and I have talked about this before. We talk about this. Commercial and residential are absolutely inextricably linked, and so many people just want to pretend that's not the case. But as I saw with all my travels across the country and all my research, is that a lot of your residential was built to support the new commercial. And so, once one of these things topples, so then do you get contagion into residential? And you can see it already in a lot of places, like in Dallas and San Antonio, other places like that, where that connection, all this brand new commercial, and then all this multifamily and luxury condos, and there's nobody there. There's nobody home.
Absolutely. That's been a theme in my world. is a lot of the people that have wanted to develop in certain areas have been large employers, and they have wanted workforce housing, as they call it, housing that their employees can live at and commute a shorter distance. And so a lot of building is happening in areas, new suburbs, like always, right? I mean, we go back to the 50s, you build out the first ring. By the 80s, it was the third and fourth ring suburbs, most of the country. And now, we're like ninth, 10th ring suburbs. But a lot of that, to your point, as you have been witnessing it all along, and now we're seeing the completed version actually proving out what you witnessed and shared under construction over the last year or two. There's tons and tons of inventory sitting out there that isn't moving, and we just had a terrible month of sales as far as new builder sales go, and we've got more apartments coming online than any time before, even more than in 1973. We've actually set a record for the most amount of apartments coming online in the United States. That's not a small feat, in my opinion.
Oh, no, not at all. And, everybody wants to look at these things separately, like look at, new homes separately from existing homes, look at multifamily separately from those two. You can't do that. This is housing stock. And essentially, when it is cheaper to rent in most cities across the country than it is to buy, then you have to look at all of these housing units together. And I think that's what a lot of people miss, is they don't look at it that way. And then, Ulysses, I'm actually working on a Substack right now that I hope to publish tomorrow morning, where, you and I talked about this, something as I was kind of driving around to impacted areas from Helene. One thing, as I was starting to talk to people about constructing tiny homes and things like that, they were saying they didn't need permits because they were in unincorporated areas. And that was the first time that, and I remember I brought it up to you, and that was the first time I had one plausible explanation as to why I had seen so much building that didn't come close to actually matching the permit.
Sure.
And so,
because they didn't need them.
And they didn't need them because, to your point, when you say the 9th outer ring, the 10th outer ring, I mean, this is what I saw in Nashville. Nashville was the very first city I went to, then to Austin. These exurbs were sometimes 30, 40, 50 miles away, way out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, literally, new home subdivisions in cow pastures with the closest gas station 10 miles away. And that's when you just realize that a lot of this is just the financing game,
Right, till you qualify.
Yeah. And so it's interesting that I think this all takes time, and I think Danielle, of all people, would say that, right? She's been very strong in her call that recession started in October of 2023, and I think that she was making a joke about who takes more flack, her or me. And I think she has taken a ton of flack for that October call, but she stuck to it. And I think that, truth takes time, and we're in the fog of war right now. And I think that a lot of these narratives that we've been living and breathing are going to look so ridiculous in hindsight. And the inventory shortage one is probably going to be at the top of the list.
I would agree with that. And the other thing that I think that has been interesting is, as we talked about the construction employment rate finally showing some weakness, but residential construction spending has actually been decreasing for 2 years now, while we're at, as well as the number of units under construction. But somehow that's translated into more employees.
Right. It looks like Danielle's back. Yay.
Welcome
I think
back,
I
Danielle.
am. Can you hear me?
We can. Welcome back.
I'm going to tell everybody here in the Admirals Club to go fly so that I can have all the bandwidth to myself.
I like it. Well, we were just sort of discussing the construction situation and how we've discussed, and you made a call about recession potentially starting last year, and that we've seen the number of units under construction in the residential space and construction spending in the residential sector has been decreasing for 2 years in a row, and we're finally just now seeing some weakness in the construction employment. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, like I was saying earlier, I think that there has been weakness in the construction sector for longer than we appreciate. Um, simply just by doing a Warren Buffett, kicking the cans, just by seeing the availability of labor in one of the fastest growing cities on the planet. So that's got to be indicative. And by the same token, the United States has nearly 6,000 data centers. That's a lot of data centers compared to about 550 in China, 550 or so in the country of Germany. We've built out so much that can be built out. Now we're sitting on all of these spec houses. And you want to make friends and influence people, why don't you just go in front of a group of commercial real estate investors and say dirt, baby, dirt, and then you can make quick enemies. But we've seen so many restaurant chains, large retailers skip right over chapter 11, go straight to chapter 7 liquidation. That combined with the infeasibility of converting countless office towers gets you to a point where you're saying we're going to be trading for dirt. So to me, at least, the future in some way, shape, or form of residential construction is going to pivot off of location of a plot that's raised off the planet, whether it be a shopping center or an office building, whatever it may be. Of course, unless you're in the business of demolition, which I'm actually looking into, and I don't say that in jest, unless you're in the business of demolition, there's going to be a hiatus, a time in which very few construction workers are needed. And I think that unlike other cycles, because of the structural impairment in office, because of the permanent shrinking of the retail / restaurant chain footprint, that there's going to be a structural feel to this decline, to this commercial real estate downturn that's going to last longer longer than predecessors have.
Danielle, when you were, one thing we were discussing when we both got disconnected, just, the timing around when we would expect, we see all this commercial real estate going to special servicing, we see all these modifications, but now we're into the double defaults, as you say, and as we're seeing. So when do you think that we're actually going to start seeing this in bank earnings?
Bank earnings. Well, I mean, if you consider the fact that banks exist to lend, right? That's their business, right? And my good friend um, at BankReg Data, he's kind of walked me through what the bell graph looks like. If you can visualize a bell graph of, for lack of a better word, credit lines that you draw on. So existing commercial real estate loans that had not been drawn down. Those have just about disappeared off the planet. Now banks are going to start to shrink their loan books. That hurts. It hurts a lot. And that's when you are compelled to clean up your balance sheet. And again, the regulators don't want this to happen. In fact, the regulators, as I learned, it looks like Randy Woodward is still listening right now. He can explain than any of us put together. But regulators have been trying to help banks push off the day of really the reckoning. But I think we're through that time now. I think that 2025 is going to be the year. And I hate to put, God, I remember Meredith Whitney. I hate to put a date on it. But there is very little, in my mind at least, that's going to stop this from happening, save some kind of martial order, state law, decree, something that comes from someplace on high that is not in a democracy, that stops this from happening. Because the last people you would think would be pissing and moaning about wanting to downgrade securities would be credit rating agencies, and yet there they are, because they don't know that they can survive yet another being slapped on the wrist. But unlike the subprime mortgage crisis right now, they want to downgrade this CMBS. They want to downgrade this commercial real estate. And it's been the regulators who've been stopping them. So I don't think that lasts forever.
To your point about 2025 and banks and the effect that real estate is having on them, Bank Term Funding Program officially ends in March. What do you see as potential impacts of that and or consequences?
Well, I mean, so the Fed has been, beating its head up against a wall, trying to encourage wider and greater adoption of the discount window. I'm a little bit torn when it comes to this. A, it was never some massive bailout mechanism. B, it was used because banks had losses in their securities, not in their loan books.
Sure.
So I think we have to distinguish there. I'm of the mind that this many years into red ink spilled, with what did Trepp tell us 2 days ago, with severity somewhere in the 63-64% range, I'm not of the mind that Jay Powell he's disingenuous. He got up on stage a few days ago and pretty much lied about the state of the economy. That's sort of his job. But I don't think that this many years into the commercial real estate debacle that he wouldn't have long ago launched a bailout if that was his intention. I don't see it happening.
Yeah, that was another question that we got, was whether you saw them stepping in to buy commercial-backed securities, mortgage-backed securities.
I mean, it would destroy Powell's legacy to have some former real estate magnate who'd gone bankrupt a few times decide for Powell to sacrifice his integrity to make it happen for a real estate guy. I'm trying not to mince words, but last time I might or might not have mentioned that the person who invented this platform we're on might or might not have been on the spectrum. I got cut off for 15 minutes. So I need to be careful with what I say. But Jay Powell's an uptight, waspy white man. And his net worth is so high that he does not need the job, nor does he need to be there. If he's just there to preserve his legacy, why on earth would he go down in his last year in office by bending to a commercial real estate guy and bailing out the sector?
When you put it that way, it doesn't seem likely.
Well, he hadn't done it yet, but that doesn't stop every smooth brain on Twitter from being like, right, it's a bailout. I'm like, okay, you realize how far we are into this process for you to suggest there's going to be a bailout.
Right. And very similarly, Geithner testified to Congress and said, we always knew that the modification programs were not going to save the borrowers. It was a way to mitigate the damage to the banks. And, I feel that this is very similar, is that they just wanted time, is what it feels like.
Well, I mean, for all the respect that I have for the people lying to the public on Bubble Vision, I didn't say that either. But I dare say that bank securities losses might be mitigated in 2025 when the Federal Reserve is, shall we say, prompted to accelerate its easing campaign.
We actually had a question from one of our longtime listeners and readers, John Grout, about that. Given that you were correct early and often about Powell's commitment to raising and holding, where do you see his focus being moving forward as far as cutting?
So this is how I feel about Powell. He's been humble. His chief lieutenant has been fairly humble, Christopher Waller. That right now, you couldn't theoretically throw a dart and hit neutral. Nobody knows. That being said, when you study the dot plot, you've actually seen, as 2024 has come to an end, you've seen the lowest, the lower bound go from 2.9 to 3.1%. My point is, while I believe that Jay Powell will react to the left-leaning bureaucrats letting the data fly the second the oath of office is taken on January the 15th, I don't think he wants to go back to the zero bound. Again, I think that there are certain aspects of his legacy that he wants to protect. The Federal Reserve would not have a blueprint laid out until year-end 2035 to exit its mortgage-backed securities portfolio if it wasn't tacitly admitting that that policy was an absolute failure. And by the same token, you wouldn't have the terminal rate that is brandished in the dot plot be 3.1% if internally the idea of a zero bound had been abandoned. And you know what? I hope that that's the case, because if things get ugly, let's just say that all this government job creation stops and maybe even goes into reverse, even just a little bit, right? The state of Washington, as MacroEdge followers saw last night or 2 nights ago, the state of Washington's put a hiring freeze on. No more wage gains. I promise you the state of Washington's not the first or last as COVID era funding goes away. So we get to the point of, well, let's just say we entered recession in April. The average recession lasts 11 months. So we could be talking about 5 months from now, 6 months from now, exiting recession. That discussion ends, however, if we start to truly see the Department of Government Efficiency kick into high gear when 56% of the jobs created in the last 12 months were in the government sector and healthcare and whatever other social service blah blah blahs you can throw out there. But if that goes in reverse while the private sector's trying to crawl out of recession, it ain't gonna work.
Yeah, and I think.
On that,
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Melody. No, it's
Sorry.
okay. Go ahead.
I think what a lot of people, you just hit on something so important, Danielle, about all that money that the states and counties. I think it was like $350 billion. I mean, this made them feel so very rich. And at the same time, they were able to raise taxes on property values because home prices were going up. I mean, this seems to me like, that funding's going away, and you're seeing these municipalities say, oops, we can't hire, we're letting go, or we're freezing wages. But just imagine what happens to that when also you start to see these property values go down. And and people are very angry about this, especially in Texas, because there seems to be a fair amount of appraisal fraud in that system. So I foresee that the municipalities are going to be in a lot of trouble in the future.
Oh, look, I decided to be a fly on the wall watching a good friend buy a house in Dallas. I was able to spend approximately 29 minutes in the presence of her realtor inside of a piece of garbage house with 1959 linoleum, and listen to this woman talk up this property. My friend bought the house. She's also now in a state of shock and huge regret because she's got to put so much into fixing this place up. But as you've said in the past, Melody, there's something in the water in Dallas, Texas. I mean, the amount of it is by the way, we're talking about the country's 4th largest city here.
Right.
But it is a strange cesspool of complicity when it comes to residential real estate. And at least you get price discovery. You're beginning to get it in my hometown of San Antonio, where I went to school in Austin. Houston appears to be in some kind of a nuclear meltdown.
Yes.
But in Dallas, the lies must go on. It's really bizarre. And in a state where there's really high property taxes, yeah, people are angry.
Yeah. Well, we used to have a location there, Danielle, that we called the Dallas Palace back at GMAC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It is very much, the NBA is held there very often. The Bushes come almost every year. I mean, it is definitely deeply enmeshed in Dallas. But Ulysses, I cut you off.
Oh no, that's quite all right. I don't remember what the question was, but the, it's interesting hearing you talk about the housing situation, uh, especially in my world where I help look at deals for new developments and acquisitions and rehabs. But some of the rental housing stock that I'm seeing get rented out, it's like people are asking to be accidental slumlords, and it's fascinating. It's not just here where I'm at, but hearing that it's even happening in Dallas and across the country.
Well, I mean, I think that there will be kind of a hangover, if you will. I've got some pretty close family members, 2 young kids, happily married, newlyweds, got an infant, and they're in a not to be named neighborhood outside of Austin. And this guy happens to be a gifted carpenter, contractor, welder, mechanic. I mean, he's one of these savants, if you will. But to hear him describe the laws that have been broken, with the studs a good 9 inches further apart than the law allows, a lot of these single family rent to build homes, I'll be curious one day to see what the legacy of this era is, because the slumlords have been able to get away with what they have.
And you can already see it, Danielle, and a lot of the, like when, as I've been driving around the country, you can look at what was a new build neighborhood a year ago that has been turned to rental for maybe less than 6 months. And it looks 10 years old. It's horrible. And so I agree with you. And I agree too, this reminds me of Amity Shlaes, The Forgotten Man, when she talks about during the Depression how everybody wanted to be a landlord, and then after it nobody wanted to be a landlord. And I definitely feel like we're getting to that place, and it's going to be an ugly legacy. And like you say, or reference the dirt, I think a lot of this we're going to bulldoze over, just like we did in previous cycles, very notably in places like Florida.
Yeah, I mean, I don't it's quickly becoming a federal matter, right? Because I think the state insurance regulators are going to say uncle at some point.
Did we lose her again, or did you lose me?
No, I can hear you okay. I think maybe we lost it again.
Oh no. Okay. But while she's coming back or not, I would 100% agree with her, and I'm going to text her while I'm talking. This is becoming a federal matter, and she was going down the pathway of insurance, and I think you're seeing it, not just in places like California and Florida, but before Hurricane Helene, North Carolina was considering a 42% increase in insurance rates. That was before Helene. Unusual Wells got that wrong because the hearing had been postponed from the spring to October. And so they put out something on X Twitter saying, after Helene, North Carolina considers a 42% a year, increase. No, that was before Helene. And so, 7 states were impacted by Helene. And so this is very quickly not just a California and Florida problem. You can hear about it even, in places you wouldn't expect, that insurance is going through the roof. And I think very soon most people won't be able to afford it. And this reminds me very much, Ulysses, of kind of that research I did back on the National Flood Insurance Program. But she's back.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I'm back again.
Welcome back.
I'm back on my phone again. I just turned my laptop off. I have no idea. I feel like I'm in some strange. I need to stop making comments about bureaucrats and people on spectrums now.
Well, we welcome them anytime. Unfortunately, Twitter seems to take issue with it.
Yeah, whoever Big Brother is here at Newark Airport, just beware next time you're flying out of here. So.
Yeah, right. Speaking of, and not politically, but just from strictly an economic or a monetary policy, we're watching as unemployment rate continues to increase. We're watching multiple different industry sectors softening in employment. Is there some type of magic wand by changing administrations or by anything that has been promised to be implemented in your mind that currently alters that course? Or do you see that we're just continuing that and that's a real tall order on day one to just say the economy's better now?
So you're speaking to somebody whose father used to host Republican National Committee local events. So that gives you an idea of the environment I grew up in. I'm about as fiscally conservative as they come. And I appreciate, I applaud, I understand, I embrace the excitement factor, because I think that the prior administration, well, it's still the current administration, but I think that the prior administration did such a disservice to the people of the United States of America by lying to them. So I think people are really excited to not be lied to anymore. And I want for there to be that magic wand so badly. So badly. But I don't think companies are finished cutting costs. I don't think that there's any kind of a magic wand that can resolve the state of household balance sheets. Um, I'm looking at a brand new payments survey. The average buy now, pay later user is going to spend $1,900 over the holidays instead of $1,500 by debit card user. We've got a spending problem in this country. I'm not talking about Uncle Sam. I'm not talking about corporate America. I'm talking about U.S. households. And until we embrace culturally the idea of living within our means, whether it's bunking up with multiple generations, which why not? Look, I'm Italian. Let's all get together and cook. Come on. But until we embrace living within our means as being an American value again, I think it's going to be tough slogging, because you have to clean up the balance sheet once and for all before you can generate top line growth, which means no, to answer your question, there's no magic wand. We have to get through this recession. And if the recession is made worse by the Department of Government Efficiency, and that's for the long-term betterment of the country, then for heaven's sake, somebody whisper in the president's ear, be honest with the people. Say, you know what? This could get ugly for a little while, but we are going to get through this together. And when we get to the other side, we're going to be a better country. Our sovereignty is going to be more secure. We'll be clearing U.S. treasuries on a central clearing platform. Its sanctity will never be threatened again, but it's going to be really ugly before it gets really pretty. And by the way, Donald J. Trump, give up as a barometer of my personal value, the stock market. And if we can go there and be honest with each other and have a kumbaya moment, that's great. But I don't know that the United States is ready for that.
Many great points right there. To your point, especially given the last week or so, Bitcoin to 100,000, elation in the stock markets. I don't think the stock market is a representative of the United States economy. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, the stock market is not, rephrase, valuation is not a timing mechanism. ... That being said, when you have people throwing in the towel based on some AI miracle, I'm paraphrasing, in mourning, by the way, and there are probably a handful of you out there who know exactly who I'm talking about and what. But when you have the price to sales ratio on the S&P 40% higher than what it was in 2000, when price to book on the S&P is higher than it was in 2000, when Warren Buffett's, the stock market capitalization as a percentage of GDP is at 170%. And when you see that it's likely that job losses began in at least April of 2024 with revisions in hand, you see how divorced the stock market is from the economy. But that being said, there's a there's an ellipsis after that. There's a dot. The ... is, again, if you have somebody who is dead set on affecting change in America and who is coming at wastefulness and the bureaucracy with a machete, who's going to unleash really bad data as their only line of defense, all of the valuation metrics that have been irrelevant in terms of timing the market, they all become very relevant. You just wait until you see the unemployment rate start to skip up more than a tenth at a time. Then the stock market won't have any choice but to pay attention. And I don't know where that leaves us. I don't know where that leaves countless Americans in their 70s and 80s who have the vast majority of their net worth in the stock market.
That's just so sobering to think. And I know you've often said, Danielle, they can't go back to the workforce. So it's, when this happens,
and that's, you bring up the most salient point. The reason the Fed put functions, the reason the Fed put has always functioned since Alan Greenspan started 1987 is demographics. But we're not in 2001. We're not in 2007. My mom's at the outer edge of baby boomers. A few days ago, she turned 78. She's not going back into the workforce for 10 more years. That was the optionality that existed in 2001 and 2007. You're in your late 70s and you're like, oh, screw it. Fine. My IRA has just been blown up to kingdom come. That's okay. 65 is the new 55. I'll go back into the workforce for 10 more years. And that was feasible. That's not feasible for people in their 70s. So as they see the interest income start to come down, that they've so enjoyed these last few years with Powell on his reign of terror higher for longer, as that interest income is depleted, 70 cents of which every dollar of interest earned is spent, they'll turn to their real estate. They'll turn to their stock market portfolios because they know that wealth, they only spend 2 cents of every dollar of wealth gained, whether it be in real estate or in the stock market. They actually only spend 2 of those cents versus 70 of the cents of interest income per dollar that they get. But again, I just told you that Jay Powell will be prompted in the next few months to amplify and accelerate the pace at which he pushes through rate cuts. Not by choice, but because the data is not going to give him another option.
Yeah, and that's just truly sobering, right? It feels like so, and I know it's hard to call timing, but I've just been feeling that probably this mania is going to persist, to protect bonuses, and probably into the first quarter. But I feel it's starting to feel like we, March of next year, some of this stuff is going to start to unwind, or we're going to start to see these impacts, like maybe even in bank earnings. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that if you want to take a look at a very large Canadian bank that said, I see Randy's still listening, that their charge-off situation was quote unquote contained. Never use that word.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I think charge-offs are becoming a real thing.
Yeah.
And I think that to the extent that banks have the latitude to write off some of these commercial real estate losses, they will. And they might even become a little bit more aggressive as they become better marriage candidates, as the Fed takes interest rates down and some of the losses that they were sitting on in their securities aren't so deep anymore, such that, you know, they're actually able to start to contend with the losses that they're sitting on in their commercial real estate book without their heads blowing up. So I think you'll have, and plus we're about to get through the holidays and the next wave of retail bankruptcies, you can feel it coming on shore like a tsunami. So it's coming. And again, I think that the big boys and the big girls in commercial real estate in 2025 are going to quit dicking around, excuse my French, and just say, we're trading for dirt or we're not trading at all. So once that starts to happen, I think you'll feel an acceleration in the cycle. And again, the most important driver is not anything that is fundamentally grounded, but rather really angry bureaucrats. Really, really, really angry bureaucrats unleashing a lot of data that they've been withholding since, I don't know, January of 2023, when revisions to private non-farm payrolls started to turn negative.
On that exact same note, would it be accurate to say that we might start seeing in the December employment reports some of the folks that are unemployed that were working through elections and campaigns, and that could be another source of both angst and data coming out?
You know, without a doubt, the DNC just did a round of layoffs itself, right? We had hotel rates have a nice pop during the election season. That was one of the few sources of inflation. And now we're starting to see states and localities, with Washington being at the outer edge, as well it should have been, right? Bastion of let's spend the public's money, be the first to freeze. So I think that we will start to see an acceleration in that trend. If I'm a conservative somewhere in the middle of the country state and I can read the tea leaves, then I'm going to be preemptive in trying to shore up the state or the municipality's balance sheet and start to look for waste and, you know, just go, you know, full Amazon, you know, 5 days a week back in the office. If you don't want that, fine. Then you can have all 7 days of the week working from home for yourself.
So I want to do a time check, right, Mr. Awsumb, since we're at the hour, Danielle. But
can I be back with the last name of Awsumb, please?
It was a good character builder as a kid.
As was having the last name of Wright, by the way. I was often called Miss Wrong. So, but you know, Danielle, I think you just said something that's, you know, really important about kind of the cutting these municipalities. And sorry, I completely lost my thoughts, so I'm going to stop. But should time check? Are you good to go, or for a few more minutes, or should we? Okay.
Let me refresh my handy dandy American Airlines app. There we go. Update it now. And the flight arrived at the gate at 5:01. So I probably got about 5 more minutes because they got to unload that plane.
All right. Awesome. Mr. Awsumb, why don't...
But I mean, but to your point, Melody, again, the federal funding train is pulled out of the station.
Right.
And Elon and Vivek, they ain't going to allow any more chicanery at the IRS. We already know that they're, quote unquote, re-examining the employee retention credit. Oh, why? You add that with the PPP and you add that with the EIDL, and we only, pissed $1.5 trillion of taxpayer money into the wind. But I think that because the bureaucrats want to unleash the data, at the same time that Trump's going to give Elon and Vivek a little bit of runway to start to cut waste, that you are going to have a disinflationary shock in the beginning of 2025 that nobody sees coming. I mean, nobody, because it's going to collide with shelter disinflation. So nobody's expecting what's coming. Nobody. And that's usually when things happen, when the consensus is overwhelming. And right now, the consensus is absolutely overwhelming that we are still in a soft landing, despite the fact that we know from revisions to the payrolls numbers, that job losses started in earnest. My buddy Steve Englander at Standard Charter figures they started in earnest in the second quarter of 2024. So we know we're in the soup, but when I say we, it's like a universe of like me, my clients, and just a handful of others on the street who aren't on Bubble Vision lying to the public.
I think
There's probably a few CEOs that have left their position this year that might agree with that, wouldn't you say? I think we're at a record number.
A record number, yeah. And a few big ones here in the last few days alone have left some very large companies. Look, you have to be agnostic, you have to be heartless, and you have to come in just cutthroat and cut costs. And that's why you hire a new CEO. New CEOs are nothing more than hired henchmen. They're mercenaries. That's their job.
Well, so I mean, this has been amazing. I feel like we could talk for a very long time. But any last things you want to talk about that are on your mind, Danielle, to wrap up, and then?
Yes, actually, Melody, I'm happy you asked. And this isn't anything snarky. Not that I mean, I can do snark with the best of them, obviously. But this last Tuesday was Giving Tuesday. I know a few of you. Oh, shit. Wait, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
We can hear you just fine.
Oh, good. Yeah. It said my connection was lost, and then I said a bad word. Anyways, forgive me. This last Tuesday was Giving Tuesday. I see Randy Woodward still listening. He's active with his food bank. Our food bank donation was tripled on this last Giving Tuesday. It is the holidays. There are people suffering in Melody's neck of the woods. There are people suffering in your neck of the woods. It is the time of the year when Americans are hurting more than they have. Maybe not the top of the K, but you know what? The bottom of the K in 2024 has gained a lot of weight. And it is time to be charitable. And it is time to give the gift of giving. So I would like for you to take that as your carry away as you're online shopping this evening.
That's awesome.
I love it.
Thank
you
you
very
so
much, Danielle.
Yeah.
With that, will you let all of our MacroEdge listeners know where they can find more of your work?
Did we lose her again?
Maybe. Are you there, Danielle?
We may have. Well, we can find her, we know, on X Twitter at, I believe it's at DiMartino Booth, correct? For anybody?
Correct.
Yeah. And, if you haven't read Fed Up, guys, I have to, Danielle is the reason that I actually joined Twitter. I could not find her stuff anywhere else after reading her incredible book. And so the only reason I'm on this space right now is because of her book. And if you haven't read it, I would definitely encourage it. She has a wealth of knowledge, as you can tell, as she was just talking here and throwing out stats that I doubt most of us could ever remember. But yeah, definitely check out her work. It's incredible.
You can also find more information at Quill Intelligence. That's QI Research. I'm going to post a link at the bottom of the page for that as well. The bottom of the spaces for everybody, so that you can find it there. And I also want to let everybody know that if you go to MacroEdge.net, you can get a 2-week free trial for MacroEdge 1, which is a combination of Ozone that we've been publishing for over a year, plus our new RE sites that Melody and I and Kenny Cat PhD out there. We are covering the real estate space, as well as Chief Economist Don Miami. And I hope that you'll give it a shot. And thank you all very, very much for tuning in to this wonderful MacroEdge Radio. From all of us at the MacroEdge Studios, we hope you have a fantastic weekend. Thank you very much. Melody?
I just got a text from her, and she said she's running to her flight, but she wants to say how thankful she was to join. Thanks so much to everyone for listening, and, that it was a pleasure. So, yep. Thank you, Danielle, even though you're not here. And thank
you, Danielle.
Yeah.
Thank you to everybody listening.
Thanks, everyone.
For MacroEdge.net, I'm Ulysses Awsumb. Have a wonderful weekend.